There are a lot of misconceptions about who parents are in child welfare cases. If you listen to popular media, you would think that the majority of these cases are child abuse and sex abuse cases, whereas the statistics show that somewhere between 60 and 80% of child welfare cases are actually neglect cases.
Most parents do not intentionally hurt their children. There are other issues that affect their parenting skills. When we can identify what the problems are, then we can work toward a long-term solution for the health of the family.
You see parents who, on a one instance, have lacked judgment and perhaps have utilized too much force when they spank their child, or perhaps even have left the home and left the child there, and it's just a very slight misjudgment. And so that's the majority of the cases that I see. But really, these are just families who need just a little bit of help.
The caseworker has a duty to engage in what the field now calls concurrent planning. Concurrent planning means I'm planning for two contingencies simultaneously. I'm planning to reunite your child with you, and I'm planning to terminate your parental rights, what Justice Blackmun called the death penalty in the field of civil rights. Some parents experience that caseworker as her enemy. When that happens, everything the state wants to accomplish is undermined. Enemies, or people who experience others as enemies, don't work well with them. What parents need to fulfill the state's goal is an ally who the parent believes in.
It's important that the parent knows there's somebody they can trust who is watching out for them in the legal system and can tell them, okay, let's make this plan work with a social worker because it's your best chance of getting the kids back. If the parent is instead distrustful about the worker who removed their children making additional demands, it's not unusual for a parent just to simply say, no, I'm not going to cooperate with you. See what cooperation has done for me so far? A good parental advocate will be able to say, I've got your back. You just need to focus on these things. Let me worry about the legal things.
I first try to help the parent understand the perspective of the social worker and ask them candidly, what is it and why is the department in your life? And try to have them articulate that fact. And then once they understand their role in the department coming into their life, then we explain what services will help them overcome that concern of the social worker.
Basically, I pick up a parent client at one of the worst moments of their life, and I help them to sort of regroup, get it together, understand what has happened, and understand what we can do to get their child back into the home. We have to have those hard conversations with our client to say, the clock is ticking here. Are we going to go toward termination of parental rights? Is there a chance of reunification? So we can't waste the first 3 months of that just being mad. We need to hit the ground running and start working toward making the home and the family safe for the child.
We had a father who was brought into court because he struck his eldest child, and he was told to go to anger management, parenting skills, individual therapy, have a psychiatric evaluation, a psychological evaluation, a substance abuse evaluation. And when our staff met with him and found out more, it turned out that his wife had died a few months earlier, and he was feeling very overwhelmed. The whole family was grief-stricken, and so the argument we made was, let's start with grief counseling. Instead of sending this father to a parenting skills program where he will sit through classes on how to discipline a toddler when he has a conflict with his 13-year-old, why don't we send him to a service that might really get at the root of what we think is the family's underlying problems. He won't have to run around to services that don't necessarily make sense. So we say, let's make the service really address the parent's need, and importantly, they should make sense to a parent, so a parent sees this whole system, the child welfare and the family court system, as having some credibility.
It's sort of a check and balance system. Again, we have a very well-meaning social work agency on one side, wanting the absolute best and wanting the home in the absolute best condition, wanting the parent in tip-top shape before we return the child. And so the role of the parent attorney is, again, to run that through the legal filter and to ask that question every time. What is it about the situation today that it's contrary to the welfare of this child to return home? Sometimes mistakes are made, and sometimes children who do not need to be removed from a home are removed from a home. And having good, effective representation on the front end can help to straighten those cases out very quickly by either getting them dismissed or getting them resolved.
I teach a clinic in which students represent parents whose children have been taken away by the foster care system. In the students' cases, 60% of the children were returned to the parents and not found ever to have been abused or neglected. And so what that tells us is that 60% of the kids in our foster care system at the time were being taken away without being in danger. And what was able to show that was the good lawyering. The students had low caseloads, and they had a partner of another student. They had a supervisor. And so they were able to go out into the city and investigate, find the facts that were relevant to the case, really learn the law, file motions that needed to be filed, do discovery if they needed to do that, and do everything that aggressive lawyering is supposed to do. And the results were good for the kids, not just good for the parents, but it sent kids home to their families who should have been there in the first place. It saved the money. Instead of keeping the kids in foster care, it sent them back home.
There are certainly cases where parents are not going to be reunified with their children. For example, if a parent is incarcerated for a long period of time, if that parent has committed a serious crime against the child, in those cases, it's extremely important that parents have attorneys as well. Because when you have a client who's not going to get their children back, they need someone to advocate for that next best option. Is that child going to go with a grandparent? Is that child going to go with an aunt or an uncle? They need an attorney to make that happen. Because if they don't have an attorney, their child will likely be taken by the state.
The foster care system is a good lifeboat when there's an emergency, when a family's in crisis, but it's developed into a long-term, just-in-case option. And people need to realize that foster care brings harm. It's like amputations. Amputating a limb when it's cancerous may in fact be the best thing, but it's never the first option. Foster care ought to be a last-ditch option so that you remove children only if you can't work on the problem with the children at home. Unfortunately, I'm seeing third, fourth generation kids from foster care. The system doesn't do a good job of healing. If we can use the system to heal the families so the children can go back home, they won't have perfect parents, but perfect isn't the standard. A parent who loves and cares for the child, that ought to be enough. If we can then help those parents do an even better job, so much the better. But we're not going to find them perfect parents by removing them.
MIT did a study and looked at cases long term. There were cases in the middle, and the term they use there is on the margins, where caseworkers might disagree about whether removal was required or not. They followed these kids for years and found out that when you erred on the side of leaving the children in the home, they actually did better on things like later delinquency, criminal activity, substance abuse, and mental health. So there's support for erring on the side of family.
Well, most statutes don't say you have to be a perfect parent to get your kid back. And so I don't think that the goal here is that this person becomes a perfect parent. I think the goal is that they gain the skills that they need to make sure that their child is safe. And if we look at the concept or think about the concept of the least amount of harm or no net harm to a child, think many people would say that returning a child home to a biological parent who still has some issues is better than severing the bond forever with that parent and leaving them in a foster care home that may be perceived as slightly better. I think that most children you ask who are old enough to tell you what they think will say that they would rather be with their parents, as flawed as they are, than anywhere else.
Most people don't realize that if you're indigent in Mississippi, you get no court-appointed attorney in abuse and neglect proceedings. That is, the judge decides without an advocate, without anyone to help you with policy, with practice or procedure. It is totally detrimental to a fair decision not to have representation.
Mississippi is the only state in the union that does not have a statute allowing for the appointment of counsel in civil cases for parents involved in abuse and neglect cases. That in itself is alarming, and I like to use the analogy whenever I talk to other advocates in the area. If you kill someone, you have the right to an attorney if you're indigent. However, if your children are taken from you, you don't have a right. And that's a constitutional rights issue. It's a due process issue. It's something that we certainly have to address here in Mississippi.
It's been a tremendous benefit to our families, tremendous benefit to our children. It's resulted in quicker reunifications, less recommendations of termination of parental rights, quicker permanency.
As a result of that study, we were able to obtain funding from the legislature for a pilot program in 2 different juvenile courts, where we added attorneys so they had lower caseloads, we improved their rate of pay, and we required them to follow practice standards in emphasizing communication with their parent clients and also emphasizing that they work with their clients so that the parents could obtain services in a timely manner. Now we have 140 attorneys and 25 social workers working on the program, and the results have been fantastic. The evaluations have shown that more families are able to reunify. It's about an increase of 36%. We have seen our state foster care caseloads drop significantly. And so at this point, we have a program that costs $12.3 million a year and is saving the state this year at least $20 million.
There is a community of advocates that are trying to work together to improve outcomes for kids by representing their parents, advocating for visitation, advocating for best practices, advocating that kids and parents see each other, that children are placed with kin so that parents have more accessibility to those kids. We're changing child welfare. Courts are paying attention, the judges as well as the administrative offices of courts, and child welfare agency leaders are paying attention and realizing that their goals, their outcomes for families are the same as ours, and that we can only help the agency get kids home sooner and safer.
And so I'm thinking about a court hearing that I had where a child that we were working with hadn't seen his mom in months. And I still remember this image of this child walking into the courthouse and seeing his mom for the first time in those months. It was a little 3-year-old child who just sprinted and just jumped into his mom's arms, and during the entire duration of the court proceeding, sat there clinging to his mother, not wanting to let go. In my mind, that is what these cases are about. But if we don't get the parent's perspective and don't really understand what the parent is going through, you miss that. You miss the strengths, because what's documented in these petitions, what's documented at these court hearings, all focus on weaknesses. And what you miss is that richness of that relationship between the parent and the child, but also the entire family constellation, the relatives, the aunts, the uncles, the fact that this child is part of a family that, as any family may have, has weaknesses. But they have other strengths that we need to find, and one way to do that is by giving parents lawyers.